I think this is a small group, but you're an important group. Each and every person is here because you were called to be here. So I thank you and I praise God for you. I wish Mary were here at this moment, because I just really wanted to take a moment to thank Mary for her witness, the tremendous, courageous faithfulness that she just lives in her life and in her family. And I love her story because it is proof positive that love is not a limited commodity in a healthy family. So love is an unlimited commodity. That is something we never have a limitation on. All right, you've heard some really impressive speakers today, some really wonderful people give and tell us some important things and educating us on some of the major issues we face in healthcare today. I have a slightly personal focus that I'm going to share, a very personal focus actually. But over my lifetime in general, what I have noticed is this widespread devaluing of human life in our society. It has been progressive. You hear, people put down conspiracy theorists, but there truly is a conspiracy to devalue human life, and it is an ongoing conspiracy. We talked a little bit earlier, some of the speakers talked about brain death, and I wanted to tell you a little bit. There really is no consistent diagnostic criteria for determining if a patient is brain dead. If you ask one doctor, they'll say it's this. If you ask another doctor, they'll say it's something else. And so without a consistent criteria, there's going to be abuses, all right? But even if they all had a consistent criteria, there would be abuses. So let's think for a moment. There was a law called the Uniform Determination of Death Act, okay? According to that law, this states that an individual is dead when he or she has sustained either 1, irreversible cessation of circulatory and respiratory functions, or 2, irreversible cessation of all functions of the entire brain, including the brain stem, okay? That's the entire brain, including the brain stem. Just remember that. The clinical information, there's something called an ICD. We had, for years it was ICD-9, and now we've progressed and they've revised it. It's now ICD-10. This is the big book about diagnoses, and it gives each diagnosis a number. And when insurance agents, when healthcare professionals and hospitals file a claim against a patient's insurance to try to get money from the insurance, they have to find the diagnoses in this big book called the ICD-10 book. And it has a list of all different diagnoses. Well, the ICD-10 diagnostic criteria for brain death is as follows: a state of prolonged, irreversible cessation of all brain activity, including lower brain stem function, with the complete absence of voluntary movements, responses to stimuli, brainstem reflexes, and spontaneous respirations. Okay, now, notice it says prolonged, but it doesn't define what is prolonged. Does prolonged mean hours, days, weeks, months? What is prolonged? There's no criteria for defining prolonged in there. So it's very subjective that way. Second, I just want you to be aware of something. When it comes to What they're saying is true brain death, the complete absence of any function of the brain and the brain stem. A person cannot take one single breath if they meet that criteria. Not one. A person, their heart will only continue to function for a very limited time if there's true brain stem death. If there's no brain activity at all, the heart will continue to beat, in most cases, for about 3 days. In very rare cases, up to 1 week. So how many stories have we heard today about this person being declared brain dead, and they were in that condition for months? Months. The heart cannot beat for more than 1 week without brain function. So even the ICD-10, doctors are diagnosing brain death left and right, and patients are being sustained for months in a, quote, brain dead diagnosis. They cannot take one breath. Their heart cannot beat for more than 1 week maximum if their brain has no function. Imagine cutting someone's head off. That would be the equivalent of brain death. You cut their head off, pretty much nothing else is going to work. All right? So the diagnosis of brain death, and all these patients who are diagnosed as brain dead really are not brain dead, even if you buy in to that whole diagnosis in the first place. Okay? All right. Now, just talk about me for a little bit. Let me tell you about who I am and my personal story. I was born in 1959, and I grew up in a very loving family, okay? I had 2 sisters, 1 brother, all right? I was number 3 in the family. In my early years, I had these odd little spells where I would just forget what had happened or how I got here or what I was doing. And there would be this little loss of time. I just didn't know what happened between here and here. An example, I remember one day I was in 1st or 2nd grade, and we were living in Indianapolis, Indiana at the time. And all of a sudden I was standing on the playground, and I thought, how did I get here? I don't remember coming in here. And the last thing I remembered was being in the classroom still, and all of a sudden I'm standing in the playground, and all these children are standing around me, pointing at me and laughing. And I thought, what's going on? And I looked down, and I was standing in a puddle of my own urine. But I had no memory of having even come to that place and that point in time. That was just a common little thing. And my parents thought, there's Jenny off in her own little world again. You know, they didn't realize that there was anything wrong. This went on. Probably by 3rd grade, I had learned to become a really good note taker in school. I probably took better notes in 3rd grade than most students took in high school. And by the time I got in high school, I was taking master's level notes because I depended upon my notes to help me remember those blank missing times. When I would have a time slot that was gone and I didn't remember anything, I looked back at my very, very thorough notes, and I still was a successful student because of those notes. So I compensated for these spells. It wasn't until my mid-20s I was married. We had 2 children at home. I had 2 foster children in addition to my own 2 children. And I did daycare, so I had another group of children that came to my home daily during the week for childcare. That was how I supplemented our family income and still was a stay-at-home mom. Altogether, I had 10 to 12 children at any one time in our home on a daily basis. Something started happening with these spells. They started to evolve and change, and I started to have a little more disability with each incident. They were very frequent, and sometimes I would be left with numbness all on one side, okay, and sometimes even muscle weakness that went with that numbness. But being a very busy mom, I just kept putting it aside. It's like this, it was nagging me, something's wrong here, I probably should seek help. But I just was too dang busy to pay attention to it, and I kept pushing it aside. Until one day, I had a little incident at my sewing machine. I came out of one of my spells sitting at my sewing machine, and I looked down, and there were little droplets of blood on the fabric. And I thought to myself, oh shoot, how did that happen? I hope I didn't ruin this project. Then I tried to move my hands, and my right hand wouldn't move. And I looked again, and I thought, oh, I had run my finger through the sewing machine under the needle, and it had stitched through my right index finger like 3 times. And the thought processes were very strange here. My next thought was, I should get those threads out of my finger, because when the feeling comes back, I'll bet that's gonna hurt. Then I finally had my first truly rational thought. This is not normal. I need help. So I went to my doctor. My doctor referred me to a neurologist, a brain specialist, a nervous system specialist. And he ran a whole battery of tests, including an EEG, which is an electroencephalogram. At the follow-up with the doctor, he informed me, he said, I have some good news and some bad news, and I have some more good news. He said, the good news is you're not having TIAs, which is transient ischemic attacks. These are early warning signs of a stroke coming on. Okay, you're not having a stroke. The bad news is you have epilepsy. These are seizures, epileptic seizures that are happening. The good news, we can treat it with medication. All right. So he started me on Dilantin and phenobarbital, 2 drugs that are designed to help change the seizure threshold and make it so I can tolerate the real world and not have a lot of seizures. I went on, I took the medications. After a few weeks on these medications, I woke up one morning and I thought, something's wrong. Something doesn't feel right. I don't have time to worry about it right now because I have to get breakfast for all these children. I have daycare kids coming and whatever. So I went about my day. It was in the back of my mind, something was odd. I made breakfast, served it to all the children, got them involved in some little activities, then I went to clean the breakfast dishes, and as I was washing dishes, it came to me, wait a minute, it's not something wrong, it's something right. My head does not hurt. I was 25 years old, and it was the first time in my life I knew what it felt like to not have a headache. I had never experienced that my entire life. I had had so many seizures so frequently throughout my life that this post-ictal or after the seizure phase was my norm. I didn't know what it felt like to not have a post-ictal headache. I thought, I could get used to this. I like it. Well, I did get used to it. Some months went by, the seasons changed. It was the following spring, and I had one of my daycare children, he and his parents had gone to Mexico and come back, and he had diarrhea. Well, I wasn't a nurse then, remember. I'm a nurse now, but I was not a nurse yet then. But even as an ordinary mom and a daycare provider, I knew I had to be careful about diapering, or we were going to spread that diarrhea around. I didn't want to get the diarrhea. So washing hands, cleaning, desanitizing the diaper changing area, making sure that I did everything possible to prevent it. I got diarrhea really bad. So I went to my doctor. They collected a stool specimen. I get a call a couple days later from an on-call physician. And he said, the test results are back. It is Giardia. It's a common little amoeba that you get when traveling. And it's treatable with Flagyl. I said, okay, doctor. I said, I just need you to know, because you're not my regular doctor, that I am taking Dilantin and phenobarbital for epilepsy, for seizure control. And whatever you give me has to be okay with that. And he said, no problem. Flagyl is a very benign medication. Don't worry about it. Well, when I took my first dose of Flagyl, it was maybe 2 hours later, if that. I woke up on the kitchen floor, very sore, with all the children around me crying. And I asked some of the older children, the preschoolers, what happened? And they told me, you just fell on the floor and started flopping around like a fish. I called the clinic. I said, I think I may have just had a grand mal seizure. I've never had one of those before. Do you think I should stop taking this medication? Hold on a minute. I'll check with the doctor. She came back. The doctor says, you probably had the seizure because you've had diarrhea, and the diarrhea is flushing your Dilantin and phenobarbital out of your system so that your drug levels are too low and they're not controlling the seizures. That's why you had the grand mal seizure. You have to continue the Flagyl so that it'll stop the diarrhea, and then the Dilantin and phenobarbital levels will come back up and you won't have any more seizures. Well, they must know what they're talking about, right? So that evening I took my second dose, followed by my second grand mal seizure, and my third, and then my fourth. My husband helped me to bed. We arranged for neighbors to come and take care of our children the next day and stay with me. We made sure that all the daycare parents knew not to bring their children to our house. When my husband tried to leave for work in the morning and was trying to rouse me, he said, Susan will be over in a few minutes, but I have to leave for work. I could hear him, but I couldn't respond. So he called 911, and they took me to the local hospital in Robbinsdale, Minnesota. I was in what they call status epilepticus, which means continuous and repeated seizures. I had had so much seizure activity that I couldn't move. My body was exhausted from the seizures, and I was not able to move. The estimate is about 10 hours that I was in that condition of seizure activity. Now, just to give you a little perspective, when a person has a seizure, there's about 3 or 4 hours after the seizure that is required for them to recover from a seizure. The bigger the seizure, the harder the recovery, okay? With a grand mal seizure, it's typical for the person to just need to sleep for about 4 hours, all right? I had 10 hours of seizures, and a typical seizure is less than a minute. So 4 hours for 1 minute of seizure activity, and I had 10 hours. I think I tried to do the math one time, I can't remember, but it would be a long recovery from your brain to recover from 10 hours of seizure activity. Well, in the ER, I was profoundly exhausted. And at one point, I finally just let go. My heart stopped, my breathing stopped. And it was the strangest thing. You've heard about out-of-body experiences? I could see myself. It was like I was up above my body and I could look down and I could see myself. And I kept getting progressively further and further away. Like there's no ceiling or anything to obstruct the view, just kept getting farther away. And there I was. Then I saw a nurse come in, run back out, run back in with a crash cart and a bunch of other people following her in, and they went to work on trying to revive me. But as I got further away, I was no longer there. I couldn't see myself anymore. And the next thing I knew was I was in a place of light. It was warm. It was comfortable. The light was in me, and I was in the light. And I was one with the light, and the light was Jesus. And I said, Lord, if you will it, I'm ready. And he said, I have much more for you to do. Boom, I was back. Oh, it hurts. I coded a second time, but I have no memory of the second code. I only remember that one. The next moments of my awareness, of being aware of anything, was in the ICU. And I was able to hear and understand what was going on around me, but I was not able to speak or move or do anything to let the people there know that I'm here. I hear you. I understand you. I think I had awake and asleep times even though I was in a coma. All right? And during the awake times, I heard and understood what was going on. And during the asleep times, it's like anybody who's asleep, I was oblivious to what's going on around me. And my sense of time was really impaired, really off. I had no idea how much time went between my moments of awareness. But certain memories, certain things occurred during that coma that I remember very vividly. There were nurses. I came to recognize their footsteps. And in my mind, I gave these nurses names. Some of the nurses, a few, not very many, but a few nurses actually spoke to me as they were working with me. They'd say, hello, Jennifer. I'm in here to give you your feeding. I'm in here to clean you up. We're just going to turn and reposition you. We're just, whatever it is they were doing, they were there. We have some IV medication for you, or fluids, or whatever. I'm here to suction your tube and, suction and help you breathe. And all of these things that they did on a routine basis, it was very comforting to hear them talk to me, even though I couldn't respond. But there were others who were not so comforting. People who came in, and I never heard their voices. I only heard movement, and I knew they were doing things. And it was odd because this was my space, this was my room in the hospital, and these people come in and I don't know why you're there, and you're not communicating with me, the person who is the patient. One nurse came in, and I heard her voice for the first and only time. She didn't speak to me, however. She spoke over me, and she said, "Would somebody come in here and help me turn this thing?" This thing? You're talking about me? You called me this thing? Really? I'm not a thing. I'm a person. Come on. To this day, I'm thankful for that nurse. It was that moment while I was in a coma that I made a decision to become a nurse. And I decided that I'm going to be one of the good ones. I'm going to treat people with dignity. There was another moment I remembered. There was multiple footsteps came into the room. Quite a few people together. I don't know, maybe 5, 6, 7 people. I don't know exactly. But there was one male voice. This one's a sad case. Young woman, 2 small children at home, essentially brain dead. Her husband, however, is being completely unreasonable. If he would only sign the paperwork, so many people could benefit from her organs. What? You want my You can't have my organs. I need my organs. Jesus told me he has more for me to do. I don't think it's just to be an organ donor. Well, okay. One other voice spoke up. "Doctor, is it appropriate to talk this way in front of the patient?" Hello, I just told you she's brain dead. She can't hear. And one day, my favorite nurse, I honestly can't remember her name. I'll just call her Nancy for now. One day Nancy came in and she was talking to me, and I opened my eyes. And I saw her, and she was so lovely to me. And she said, "Well, hello there. Welcome back. We've been waiting for you." She says, "Can you speak?" Well, they had extubated me a little while before that, maybe a few days before that. And my throat was still very raw, and things weren't really working properly yet. And I tried to speak, and I think it came out something like, She said, okay. How about this? Can you blink your eyes? And I blinked. She said, "There you go, now we can talk. All right, you blink once for yes, and you blink twice for no." And she started to ask me yes and no questions, and asked a series of questions. And through those yes, no questions, she was able to determine that I knew my name, I knew who I was, I knew that I was married and I had 2 children. I knew that I was sick and in a hospital. I knew that, that I knew how old I was. She was able to figure out that I was cognizant. I was there. Well, it took, my recovery after that took some time. There were multiple different little steps. Even though I was able to blink, I was otherwise still completely paralyzed, okay? I want you to be aware of something. There was a term that doctor who come into my room that time had used. He referred to me as a vegetable, okay? He had said that even if somehow I came out of this coma I would never be anything other than a vegetable. I want you to be aware of terminology and semantics, because the people on the other side of this issue are very ready and willing to use words and semantics to soften our attitudes towards killing. They use words to dehumanize people. Vegetable. Never, ever refer to a human as a vegetable. There is nothing that happens, no matter what their stage, or condition in life, no matter how severe their disability is, there is nothing that changes the DNA from human to broccoli. This is a human being, and as such, we need to treat that person with human dignity. I remember as I was gradually improving and getting better, when I was able to swallow again, and they were able to give me real food. You have no idea how delicious applesauce can be. Oh, it felt so good in my mouth and tasted so delicious. I started to be able to use my hands a little bit, move my arms. It was really awkward, but they gave me a little chalkboard and taped chalk into my hands so I could try to write some basic words. Other than that, it was still down to the yes-no stuff. I started to try to get some different, they gave me some different therapies, and I gradually started to be able to speak. It was probably close to 3 months from the time I took Flagyl, which, by the way, is contraindicated, meaning it's not advised to give to people with any central nervous system disorder, such as epilepsy, okay? This whole process of recovery from the status epilepticus took about 3 months. And I had some help during that time. I didn't spend that whole time in the hospital, but I had help after I got home. And it was probably a good year before I was really strong physically again. I had gotten down to about 96 pounds while I was seriously impaired. I have lived, and I continue to live, a very full life. I raised my children. I'm involved with my grandchildren's lives. I went to school and became a nurse. I taught nursing and helped form the next generation of nurses. I have saved lives, and in so doing, I have affected many more lives. And had Dr. Anonymous had his way, none of that would have happened. A few things I'd like you to consider. It may be legal to use some of these stealth methods to kill other human beings, but it's not lawful. Can we really know what patients who cannot speak for themselves really want? I didn't have an advance directive or a durable power of attorney or any of that at the time. But had somebody asked me when I was in my early to mid-20s, would you want to live dependent on machines with tubes coming out of your nose and your mouth and in your veins? Would you want to live like that? Dependent on machines for breathing and eating? I probably would have said, no, I don't want to live like that. You ask a millionaire, would you like to live in that little cardboard hut over there? He'd probably say, no, I don't want to live like that. But given the alternative of living like that or not living at all, that's a whole different story. That's a whole different ballgame. My will to live was powerful, strong. I wanted to live. I did not want anyone killing me via harvesting of my organs. Another thing is the whole awareness thing. I didn't know what it was called back then, but people say, now I know that they call that condition of not being able to respond, being locked in. I was locked in. I was in this constant conversation with God during that time. And I was not able to communicate with the other people around me. But I was still fully functioning. Do you think that if someone is given a diagnosis of persistent vegetative state, could that be a death sentence for that person? Should it be a death sentence for that person? Other terms to be aware of: harvest. We harvest organs. Hello. You harvest wheat. Human organs aren't for harvesting. It's not a crop. Don't harvest humans, okay? Death with dignity. We want dignity in our death. Death with dignity. There is nothing undignified about the dying process. Suffering and dying is not undignified. It is the human response to suffering and death that is either dignified or undignified. So the next time you hear someone saying she deserves death with dignity, or he deserves death with dignity, just whose dignity are they talking about? They don't want to have to witness this other person suffering. Whose misery are we putting them out of? Not theirs, yours, right? So the death with dignity, it's not the dying that's undignified. One death we all know about, Jesus Christ. His passion, his suffering was horrific. Did he lack dignity through his passion and death? No, he did not lack dignity. The people around him, some of them lacked dignity, many of them did. Okay? But it wasn't his loss of dignity that was the issue there. Pope John Paul II had Parkinson's disease. We saw him become progressively more and more disabled over years. And we saw his posture become more and more bowed, and he couldn't sit up straight by himself. He couldn't get out of his wheelchair without assistance. He had to have a lot of help. But that man did not lack dignity throughout his time of suffering and his dying process. He was a dignified person, and no suffering robbed him of his dignity. So your dignity is within yourself. It is not something that is a circumstance. Okay? Organ donation. I want to talk to you a little bit about the price of organs, all right? She's going to try to put a slide up here, but just in case the slide doesn't come up, it's just a single slide, all right? So, she says, I have little faith. Okay. Are you aware that in the organ harvesting business, this organ procurement business is big business? There's a lot of money in it, okay? The doctors make money, the hospital makes money. All the staff that are involved in harvesting the organs, transporting the organs, delivering them to the next recipient, and installing the organs in the recipient, transplanting those organs. Every step of that process, there is money being made and money handed over from one hand to another. People are making money all along this process. A pair of kidneys brings in about $668,000. That's just the kidneys, okay? The lungs bring in over $1 million. Yes, over $1 million for lungs. The heart, 1.2 million. The pancreas, about 300,000. The liver, over 700,000. The intestine, you don't even think about intestine, do you, when you think about transplanted organs? Well, people have intestinal cancer or whatever. They can take pieces of other people's intestine and patch their intestines up. They can split, intestines are long. They can split that up into little segments and share it among a whole bunch of people. Intestines can bring in over $1.5 million for the intestines, okay? Add it all up. She's getting it up there. Okay. Well, add it all up. It ends up more than $5.5 million for harvesting the organs from one person. Do you think there's an incentive to declare someone brain dead? Hitmen don't get that much. $5.5 million. Okay? No wonder that doctor was frustrated that my husband wouldn't sign the paperwork. They lost some money. Not to mention the fact that that was an HMO that I belonged to up there in Minnesota back in the 80s. Okay, that was 1986. And because it's an HMO, their doctor's mistake of prescribing Flagyl for me, which brought all that on, meant the HMO lost the money. They're out of money because of that. They lost money on me. And if they could get my husband to believe that I was brain dead and that there was no medical error that occurred on their part, they could profit from my organs, and they could stop covering my medical care. All right? We got a bill from the HMO that said you have exceeded your maximum benefits and you owe us, it was close to $200,000. That's back in the mid-'80s, okay? Close to $200,000 that you owe us. This is before the internet was really big. I went and did some research. I had to go get a physician's desk reference, and I looked up Flagyl, and And there it was. It's contraindicated. And I had to look that word up. What does that mean, contraindicated? It means you're not supposed to give it to people who have these problems. So it was contraindicated for persons with central nervous system disorders, such as, and it had a list of those, and epilepsy was topping that list. And in the event that a person with one of these gets it, their chance of having this particular type of reaction is higher. The only patients we've ever seen this reaction is people with central nervous system. The reaction is seizures, status epilepticus, cardiopulmonary arrest, coma, paralysis. All because the doctor didn't want to take the time to look up Flagyl and make sure it was okay for me to take it. And you're sending me a bill, and this was your doctor. So I sent them a letter back with a copy of the bill and said, I'll tell you what, I'm a forgiving person. I believe people can make mistakes, and I don't think the doctor intended to harm me, but here's a copy of what the physician's desk reference says about giving Flagyl to persons with epilepsy, and here's what happened to me. Compare the two. You figure it out. But I'll tell you, erase this bill, never send me another bill, and I won't sue you. Send me another bill, on the other hand, and I'll own you. Well, I never got another bill, so they got off cheap if you ask me. All right. The organ procurement business. Back then, I would have said, be an organ donor. It's a good thing. Be an organ donor. You know, you can help. Your tragedy can be something that helps other people. Isn't it wonderful to turn tragedy into something good? It is. It's such a nice, feel-good thing. But I went home and I scraped that organ donor. It was a little pink dot, I think, in Minnesota we had, and I scraped it right off my license. I said, I am not an organ donor. If you look at my Texas driver's license now, it does not say donor. Take a look at your driver's license if you have one, and make sure that, you know, here in Texas now, it's not a pink dot you stick on your license. It's printed, it's part of your license, and it has a little picture of a heart down in the lower right corner, and it says donor. Look at your license and make sure. If your license says donor, you might want to rethink that. You might want to reconsider and go back to the Department of Public Safety and say, I want to change my donor status. I do not want to be a designated organ donor. Because if you are, and something happens to you, the pressure is going to be on your loved ones to sign on the dotted line. If you are not an organ donor, that's one less incentive for them to kill you. I want to talk for a moment about extraordinary versus extraordinary care. We've gone into this and other speakers have talked about it, so I won't give it a lot of time. I just want to let you know we have a moral obligation to always provide ordinary care for all people, regardless of their state, stage, or condition in life. Ordinary care. Nutrition and hydration are ordinary care. Treating basic infections, that's ordinary care. Providing a person with something to make them comfortable is ordinary care. Oxygen is ordinary care. okay? Someone who has a serious respiratory condition, whether it's a chronic, terminal, or even temporary condition, if they're having respiratory problems, they need oxygen support, okay? That's ordinary care. None of those things are extraordinary. Giving a person nutrition and hydration, think of it this way, okay? Ordinary care, extraordinary care. If I stop providing ordinary care for my patient, the patient will die. Are they dying from their disease or their injury? No, they're dying from neglect. They're dying from dehydration or starvation or hypoxia. They're not dying from their disease. Somebody with Alzheimer's didn't kill the patient. Denying them nutrition and hydration killed them. Dehydration killed them. Okay? If I discontinue extraordinary care, then the condition is what takes over, and the person would die from their disease process. Okay? You don't remove ordinary care. That's killing through neglect. All right? It's what we call passive euthanasia. The ordinary care it's imperative. It's not optional. The Terry Shivos of this world. Terry didn't die from brain death. I remember getting so frustrated. I was living in Sacramento at the time, and all the headlines and all the things about Terry Shivo, and the media portrayed her as being brain dead. I thought, well, first of all, she's not on a respirator. Brain dead, if their brain is dead, the person can't breathe. She was not on a respirator, so how can they say she's brain dead? The ignorance that is allowed to be perpetrated out there with a deliberate agenda attached to it is atrocious. I like to believe in the basic goodness of people. I like to believe that the doctor who wanted my organs was just mistaken. He just didn't know any better. But after going to nursing school and studying a little bit myself about those types of things, I had to realize that, wait a minute, this is an expert in the field. He had to know that in order to stop the seizures that I was experiencing, they would have had to give me some very powerful drugs to make my brain stop seizing, okay? I don't know if you've ever seen an EEG. They have all these little wires that they attach all over the head, and each wire has, on this piece of paper, there'll be a needle that's kind of drawing the brainwave pattern that they're reading from that particular electrode. So you'll see a whole bunch of little lines, and each line is going to look a little like this. It'll have a little tiny wave to the line. Okay, that's a normal EEG. What happens with a seizure is that some or all of those lines start to go from this to this. That's super, super hyperactivity, okay? And the body and the brain just can't cope with that extreme amount of activity in the brains. So they give you drugs that are meant to slow those brain waves back down, get it back down. All right? But once they finally get you out of the status epilepticus and they get the seizures to stop, those drugs are still in your system. And the brain wave patterns, which normally are like this, are now like this, flat line, just flat line. That doctor had to know that the drugs they had me on would induce an artificial coma and minimize, if not practically eliminate, readable brainwave activity. He had to know that. And was he taking advantage of my husband, my distraught husband, who is not medically trained, to convince him to sell me $5.5 million of my $5.5 million worth of organs? I don't know what that 1986 price would have been, but that's today's dollars. All right, that's pretty much all I have to say. Do I have any questions? Yes, sister.
Thank you so much for sharing your story. It's important that we're aware. At the same time, in our diocese, we had priests who donated kidneys a lot, chose to donate for brother priests, and there's a whole beautiful surgery that people perish with that. You're a Christian, self-gifted, so I know there's a huge difference, but I think we could walk away with an only belief approach to the organ.
Very good.
So I just felt like it might be good to balance out the church's teaching on when it's listed and even no.
Good. Thank you, sister. Let me address that also. We also, in Sacramento, we had a bishop who had liver failure. And actually, no, was it the bishop himself? Yes, the bishop had liver failure, and it was a man in the diocese donated part of his liver, because the liver can regenerate. There are organs we can donate and still survive and live. And there's nothing illicit or immoral about donating one of my kidneys to help someone else live, or donating part of my liver to help someone else live. But to donate all my organs would be suicide for me, okay? Organ donation started out, the first organ donation that was a successful organ donation, I think, was a kidney.
A twin donated a kidney to a twin.
Yes, and that was back in the 60s, was it not? Yes, so back in the 60s, a twin donated one of their kidneys to the other twin, and it was a success. Then we started seeing a little bit more of that happening in kidney donation, and they realized that they could take part of the liver, and the liver would regenerate and regrow, so that both people would end up with a full liver, you know, if the liver was removed from part of one. What happened, though, is whenever there's money involved, greed will take over. In addition to the financial greed, there's another kind of greed that we suffer from in our society, and I think it's maybe part of human nature, and it's one of those parts of human nature that we need to control and overcome, and that is greed for power, okay? So we have financially, there's money to be made through organ transplantation. There's also, there's esteem. The esteem of your colleagues. He transplanted this organ, and whatever, you know, what a great surgeon, what a great humanitarian, all this recognition, and then there's this, it can get carried away. A person can get to a point where they think that their accomplishments are so great that it's more important than other people's lives, okay? And there was a point in time when the diagnosis of brain death was introduced, because we had to figure out, okay, we can take a kidney, we can take part of the liver, and we have still two living people. The donor lives and the recipient lives, okay? But what if we could take a heart? And they did try getting hearts from people who had actually died And the hearts were not viable. They wouldn't work. They weren't good. They discovered through some different trials and errors that we can't use the organs, the vital organs, from people who are truly dead. Okay? We have to get the organs out of the body while the body is still perfusing those organs with blood, with the circulation still happening and still keeping those organs viable. So when they actually harvest organs from a quote brain dead person, they harvest them in a very particular order. The heart has to be last. The heart and lungs come out very quickly together almost, okay? There'll be a whole organ procurement team working on this. They take the organs that aren't going to kill the person instantly. I mean, you would die without your kidneys. If you didn't have either kidney, you're gonna die. But they can take the kidneys and that person can still live for hours while they can still live for hours without kidneys. Okay, they can take the liver and the person could live for hours. They can take the intestines and the person can still live for a little while. They can take all these other organs, the pancreas, but the heart and lungs have to be the very last organs harvested, because this whole process of harvesting all these organs is taking a little bit of time. And if they take the heart first, then none of the other organs are going to be viable or usable. So it's a scary, sick science of killing the person through organ harvesting while retaining the viability of the organs for transplantation. Yes?
I have something to say about living organ healthy people who donate their organs. There are many reasons no one should be pressured into doing that, no matter who it is who needs the organ, because it's supposed to be a charitable gift. There are other things to consider. One, for instance, donating.
Would you come and speak here so that everyone can hear you better? Because I know that you're recording this also, and it's hard for a recording to hear someone speaking from out there.
All I want to say is that there are things that sometimes patients are not told about donating a vital organ when they're a healthy person. One is when you donate part of your liver, sometimes your liver dies, and then you're in the same boat and need a liver transplant. Sometimes there's excessive bleeding. About 3% of the time a person has a debilitating problem afterwards or dies. With kidney donation, there's a much smaller percentage of complications. I'm just saying this because some people have moral obligations to take care of their families, to do other things that they must do, and so they have an obligation to protect their health at all costs. Secondly, do you realize that when you donate an organ, that can affect your insurability? Okay? So you may not be able to get the kind of insurance that you need after that, because that does affect your health status as far as insurance companies are concerned. So there are some things to think about, to consider, that people might not otherwise consider when it comes to that. Another thing is the ad hoc committee at Harvard, met at Harvard, and they decided that they were going to define an irreversible coma as brain death. And the reason that they did that was not because it was true death. They never even talked about whether or not it was really death. They talked about how do we, because the dead donor rule was in play, and so we have to have a dead donor. So how do we declare this person dead so we can get their organs? It was not, are they truly dead, but we want to find a way to get the organs that are the healthiest from these people, so we're going to declare them dead. So there are a lot of things to consider when it comes to organ donation. The fact that there have been so many recoveries of people who've been declared brain dead convinces me that we can never be certain that a person is truly dead who's been declared brain dead until after they're really dead and their circulation has stopped and there's no more heartbeat and no more respiration, permanently lost. You can't determine that within 5 minutes of a person stopping with a heartbeat or breathing, because we might be able to resuscitate that person. If you can resuscitate them, are they truly dead? So that's all I wanted to say.
Would you also address lifespan change for a donor?
Oh yes, when you have donated an organ, you may be shortening your lifespan, okay? And so I am not saying don't donate an organ. My goodness, if one of my kids was dying because they needed part of my liver or they needed a kidney, I would be the first one on the table. That is not my thing. But however, if my liver or kidneys were failing and one of my kids wanted to donate an organ, I'd say, don't be crazy. You know, you are a younger person. You're going to need that organ for a long time. So I think you have to look at the perspective of what are we doing here, okay? Does that answer the...
Yes. So is there a moral obligation to be a live donor? No. Is it a good thing? In many cases, yes. It can be a good. It can be a good. And like she said, you know, if my child or my grandchild could benefit from my kidney, even if I knew that that's going to take 7 to 8 to 10 years off my lifespan, I would probably do it, because they're so young. Their whole life is ahead of them, and they're going to die very young if they don't have a good kidney. God gave us 2 kidneys for a reason, because a normal, healthy, functioning person needs the function of 2 kidneys. God made the liver as the largest gland in the human body. And it's the largest gland in the human body because it has the largest job. It has a lot of work to do. And the donor, in an ideal situation, the donor would donate almost 2/3 of their their liver. Almost 2/3 of the liver gets donated to the recipient, because the recipient's health is so impaired. They need the bigger portion of liver to start their recovery. And the donor is an otherwise healthy person. They don't take the organs from someone who's impaired. You have to otherwise be healthy. And the ideal is that even though I have only 1/3 of my liver remaining, that 1/3 and the rest of my healthy condition is going to enable that liver to regenerate quickly, okay? So yes, there are places where organ donation is not evil, and it can be used for great good. But it's not a moral impairment that someone volunteer their kidney or liver and be a live donor. But the complete organ harvesting is a grave evil. Yes?
So at this time, you're saying that once a person is dead, none of the organs can be used.
Okay, she's asking about once a person is truly dead, really dead, are none of their organs usable? Actually, there are certain things that can be used, including the corneas, the skin, certain tendons and ligaments in our body. These are all usable parts of the human body that can be used even from a cadaver. All right, a cadaver meaning someone who's truly dead. The body is completely dead. And so we can harvest some things from cadavers, from truly dead people. But the more vital organs like the heart and lungs, and they have not figured out how to do that. Julie, maybe you can help me. Is the pancreas, is that dividable also? I wasn't sure. Okay, so it's just the kidneys and the liver that we can safely transplant from a living donor to a living recipient without...
I would say there's always a
Well, always a risk, but
And another thing that people don't often think about is that organ recipients can have problems. I know.
there's a rejection factor.
There's a rejection factor, but there's also, and multiple times you may have to have an organ donation. But another thing that you have to consider is you've got to take anti-rejection medication for the rest of your life, unless you have a pretty perfect match, which would mean an identical twin. So you are looking at a lifetime of having to take anti-rejection medication. Maybe your body will reject that organ, but for some people it's worth the risk. For some people it's not. It's their choice. That's one time I say I'm pro-choice. I think that I would never condemn anybody for being a recipient of an organ or being a donor. What I would say is you have to consider all of the things involved and make a responsible decision. There are so many factors involved that I hope you have an honest doctor.
yes. Yes.
As your experience of being aware while you were ostensibly in a coma, have you said that and others since your own recovery? Has that been something that you've looked at? And if so, what's been your kind of experience?
He's asking if my experience of awareness during my coma is something that I've studied and if I know other people experience that. I do know that other people experience that. I don't know what the percentage is. I also know that there's no way for us to know which patients have awareness and which do not. Okay, until or unless that person later is able to communicate that to us. But without knowing if a person is aware, what harm is there in treating them as if they're aware and talking to them? If the person is aware, however, and we treat them as if they're not aware, that could be harmful. So we're not harming a person who's unaware by treating them like they're aware, but we are harming an aware person by treating them as if they're not aware. Okay, so to me, the safe and the best pathway is to treat every patient as if they're aware because there's the possibility that they may be. There was a time when I studied it in more detail, and I'm gonna, she mentioned when she introduced me that I'd had an accident. I had an accident on June 11th when I was hiking on Flat Top Mountain in Anchorage, Alaska. And my sister and I had flown to Alaska for a little vacation. And on the way back down the mountain, I lost my footing, fell and hit my head on rock. I did not realize that my brain was injured. When I fell, I also hit my funny bone and I twisted my ankle, and that's what was hurting, and that's what I was paying attention to. My sister said, "Is your head okay? Is your head okay?" I said, "Yeah, my head's fine. It's my elbow and my ankle that are hurting." And I said, "I don't know how I'm getting down this mountain with my twisted ankle." But it was 2 days later, after we were back home in Houston, in Spring, Texas, I went for a bicycle ride. And we don't know what happened. There were no witnesses, but I was found in the road, and I was rushed to the ER. The side of my bicycle helmet, this whole left side was smashed and cracked, and I had injuries on my left side, mainly soft tissue injuries, and I was laying in an intersection. There were some skid marks in the road, so we don't know if there was it's an intersection. There could be old skid marks, it could be new, I don't know. But when a person is riding a bicycle and has an accident, usually they go head first over the handlebars and the injury will be to the front of the helmet. This was all on the side. The MRI at the hospital showed that the injury was to the frontal lobe, which is a rebound injury from hitting the back of the head. The brain bounces inside the skull. So you hit the back of your head hard, it hits the back and it rebounds forward and hits the front of the skull. And there was damage on the back and on the front. And I had bleeding happening in the frontal area. The bicycle accident was all over here. And they think that the bleeding, I had a couple of seizures. I had been seizure-free for several years, and I had a couple seizures in the hospital, and then one more a couple of weeks later after I was released from the hospital. And I have little holes in my memory. When I'm fatigued, I have a hard time putting sentences together. I have a hard time thinking and communicating, and multitasking is really challenging for me. This latest injury to my head, I think it's lowered my IQ 40 or 60 points. But I'm doing well. A month and a half ago, I could hardly communicate very well at all. My speaking was very impaired, and I could not think of words. Couldn't bring the words out of my brain and put them on my lips, you know. So I've been blessed in more ways than I can communicate to you or to anyone. The blessings in my life are so unlimited. It's amazing all the gifts God has given me, and I'm thankful for every day. I'm thankful, when I told you Jesus said, I have much more for you to do. I can tell you that the rest of my life since then, I keep asking him, what? What do you have for me to do? What do you want me to do today? Some days I'm better at seeking that call than others. But overall in my life, I've sought that to find out what God wanted me to do in my life. Yes?
Yeah, I just thought kind of make a comment. And there's several times that being a person of prayer, many years of spiritual renewal and stuff, I've been called into the ICU to pray with, along with other people, with people who are on ventilators, and scheduled to be disconnected the next day. And we've gone in and we've prayed in the ICU, and also prayed for chaplain of Divine Mercy in the hospital. And we led other people into that. We weren't even aware of quite what that prayer was all about. But there's great power in the chaplain of Divine Mercy in those situations. And so maybe you can't do one thing or another, but you can go into the hospital or into an ICU, into a nursing home, into a situation, and you can always go into the power of prayer and trust and faith. And believe me, we've seen people miraculously delivered through that in the ICU within 24 to 48 hours. You know, it's just unbelievable, but that's how.
So I think, could all of you hear him well? So he's just explaining the power of prayer in a situation that you can go into the hospital, you can go into the ICU, and you can pray. I'd take it one step further. Even if you yourself cannot go, the prayer doesn't have a limited venue. You can pray from wherever you are. And our seriously disabled people are often the most spiritually connected people. To say that they are useless is so utilitarian, because their spiritual use is so over the top. They are so close to God in their physical impairment that their prayers availeth much. Yes.
Do you know how John Wilson has been in the
I really don't know the statistics. She's asking what's the longest time somebody's been in a coma and recovered. I really don't know the statistics, but I know it's been years, multiple years. It's not a matter of days, weeks, months. There have been rare cases where someone came out of a coma after years in a comatose state.
Lots of statistics on lots of cases I have told.
Okay. Julie Grimstad said that she has some statistics and a list of cases of people who have recovered from prolonged coma, and she can get that information for you. Is that on the website? No?
No, it's just something I've let the person
Okay, so you may need to contact Julie Grimstad. All right. Any other questions? Comments?
Can we get copies of this video from them?
He'd like to know if copies of this video will be available.
God willing.
God willing?
And it's present.
God willing, okay. God willing, that's a big thing. Yeah, all right. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I'm so glad all of you were here. Please, we're a small number here today. Please take this message with you, live it, and share it, okay? God bless all.
Thank you. I just want to say thank you to everybody who came and stuck it out for the whole day. I just can't, I get active and get to move around and you're all sitting there. It's just wonderful that you stayed. And I hope that you'll pick up some things and take them home with you and spread them around, give them to other people. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.